Jake Harper had been in Black Hollow, West Virginia for exactly 1 week when he found the first journal, and by the time he found the third one, he understood that his grandfather had not died of a heart attack in his sleep, the way the coroner's report said. He had died of finally stopping. Jake will tell you, if you ask him now, that he should have left the first night. He will also tell you that leaving was never really an option, not once he understood what leaving would mean for everyone still living in that town, and that this is the part of the story that keeps him awake more than any of the rest of it. Let me tell you what happened. And let me tell you now, before we go any further, that this does not end the way you want it to. Jake was 26 years old, a software engineer at a mid-sized company in Seattle, when the call came from a lawyer in Fayette County informing him that his grandfather Everett Harper had passed away and had left him the family house in a town Jake had visited exactly twice in his entire life, both times before the age of 10. Black Hollow sat deep in a fold of the Appalachian Mountains, a coal town that had been dying by inches since the mine closed in 1987. Population somewhere under 200 and shrinking every year the way small mountain towns shrink, through death and departure, and very little arriving to replace either. Jake drove out from Seattle over 4 days, and the closer he got, the more the landscape changed around him. Interstate giving way to state highway, giving way to county road giving way. In the final 8 miles, to a single-lane mountain road that switchbacked up through forest so dense and so dark that even at 2 in the afternoon, his headlights felt necessary. He arrived at his grandfather's house, a modest 2-story frame structure at the edge of town, where the last paved street gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way, a 1/4 mile further on, to the tree line of the mountain forest. And he parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at a place he barely remembered and felt, for reasons he could not have explained that first afternoon, a specific and total unease that had nothing to do with grief. He would understand that unease very well within a week. The town itself unsettled him before the house did. He stopped at the single gas station and general store on his way through, needing supplies, and the woman behind the counter looked at him for a long moment before ringing up his items, her expression somewhere between suspicion and something closer to fear. She said, "You're Everett's grandson." Jake said he was. She said, "You here to sell the house?" Jake, he was here to figure that out. She was quiet while she bagged his groceries, and then she said, in a voice pitched low enough that Jake understood she did not want to be overheard by the one other customer in the store, "Sell it fast if you can. Don't stay in it longer than you have to. Your grandfather understood how to live here. Most people don't anymore." Jake asked what she meant. She looked past him, toward the window, toward the dark tree line visible at the edge of town, and she said, "Just get your business done and go home, honey. That's the kindest thing I can tell you." She would not say more. Jake tried twice more over the following days to get her to explain what she meant, and both times she found a reason to end the conversation quickly, her eyes moving toward the door or the window each time, as though checking whether something was listening. He noticed the same behavior across the whole town over his first few days there. People were not unfriendly exactly. They were careful. Careful in the way people are careful around something they have collectively agreed not to discuss, the way a family is careful around a specific subject at a holiday dinner. Nobody looked him in the eye for very long. Nobody asked him to stay for coffee. And more than once, walking the town's short main street, he caught people watching him from windows, watching with an expression he could not fully place until his third night in the house, when he understood it for what it was. It was the look of people who were relieved someone else, for once, was the one being watched instead of them. The house itself was exactly what Jake expected from a dead man's home that nobody had touched in the weeks since his death. Dusty, quiet, full of the particular stillness of rooms where a routine has stopped mid-motion, his grandfather's reading glasses still on the side table beside his armchair, a coffee cup in the kitchen sink that had gone dry weeks ago. Jake spent his first 3 days doing the ordinary work of settling an estate, sorting through belongings, making calls to the lawyer, figuring out what could be sold, what needed to be thrown away, what, if anything, he wanted to keep. He found the journals on the 4th day in a locked drawer of his grandfather's desk that took him 20 minutes to force open with a screwdriver, feeling faintly guilty about breaking into a dead man's private drawer, and doing it anyway, because something about the lock itself, heavy-duty, clearly installed, well after the desk was originally built, told him that whatever was inside had been considered important enough to protect. There were 7 of them. Composition notebooks, the cheap kind sold at any drugstore, filled from cover to cover in his grandfather's small, careful handwriting, spanning, according to the dates on the inside covers, from 1974 to just 2 months before his death. Jake opened the most recent one first. The final entry, dated 8 weeks before Everett Harper's death, read, "It has been quiet almost 4 months now. I know what that means. It does not mean it has stopped. It means it is getting hungry again, and it is being patient about how it shows it. I am 78 years old, and I do not have the strength I had even 10 years ago to keep doing what I have been doing. I do not know what happens to this town when I cannot do it anymore. I pray it is not something I live to see. I pray even harder it is not something anyone I love has to see." Jake read this 3 times before setting the notebook down. He did not yet understand what his grandfather had been doing, or what the "it" in the entry referred to. He would understand within 4 days, and by then it would already be too late to simply pack his car and drive back to Seattle, the way every rational part of his mind was telling him to do. He read the journals in order over the following 2 nights, staying up far later than he intended, unable to stop once he started, the way you cannot stop reading a story that is clearly heading somewhere terrible, but that you need, absolutely need, to understand. What his grandfather had documented, across nearly 50 years of careful entries, was this: Black Hollow had been a mining town, and the mine that had sustained it for over a century had cut deep into the mountain, following seams of coal that ran, according to the geological surveys his grandfather had somehow obtained and pasted into the back of the second journal, far deeper and in far stranger directions than any coal seam should naturally run. In 1961, a mining crew working the deepest active tunnel, nearly 2,000 feet down, had broken through into a natural cavern that was not on any survey map, a cavern that the company geologist who examined it afterward described, in a report Everett had somehow obtained a copy of, as geologically impossible given the surrounding rock formations. 4 miners went into that cavern to survey it for potential coal deposits. 3 came out. The 4th was never found, and the mining company, rather than investigate further, sealed the cavern entrance with reinforced concrete within a week and told the families of the missing miner that he had died in a rockfall, too dangerous to recover the body from. That was not what had happened. Everett Harper had been 26 years old in 1961, working as a mine safety inspector, and he had been one of the last people to speak to the surviving 3 miners before the company moved them out of state with generous settlements and strict confidentiality agreements that Everett suspected, but could never prove, involved implicit threats beyond the financial kind. What those 3 miners had told him in a single conversation in a bar, the night before they left town forever, none of them ever willing to discuss it again afterward, was that something had come up out of the darkness of that cavern while they surveyed it. Something large, something that moved wrong, joints bending in directions that should not have been possible, and that it had taken the 4th miner not with violence exactly, not the way an animal attacks, but with a kind of patient, deliberate purpose, the way you would take something that already belonged to you. The company sealed the cavern, but sealing a coal mine does not seal a mountain. And whatever had been in that cavern, whatever had taken the 4th miner, had other ways in and out of the tunnel network beneath Black Hollow that had nothing to do with the sealed entrance. And within 2 years, the town began to understand this the hard way. People went missing. Not often, not in a pattern obvious enough for outside authorities to notice, spread out over years, blamed on accidents in the mountains, on people leaving town without saying goodbye, on the ordinary tragedies that happen to isolated communities. But Everett Harper and a handful of other people in the town who paid close enough attention began to see the actual pattern beneath the official explanations. It took someone from Black Hollow roughly every 18 months, and the people it took were never chosen randomly. They were, without exception, the people who had started asking too many questions, or who had started talking too openly about leaving town and telling outsiders what they suspected, or who had, in some way the town's older residents seemed to understand intuitively, even if they could not fully articulate it, drawn attention to themselves in a way that something patient and ancient and hungry, deep in the mountain, found impossible to ignore. Jake's grandfather had spent nearly 50 years, since that conversation in the bar in 1961, doing something the journals referred to only obliquely, in careful practical language that avoided ever fully naming what he was describing. He had been managing it, watching the patterns, identifying as best he could who in the town seemed to be drawing the wrong kind of attention, and finding ways, gentle ways, careful ways, to redirect them, to calm them down, to convince them to stop asking questions or stop talking about leaving before it was too late for them, the way it had already been too late for 11 people across 5 decades, whose names filled the back pages of the 4th journal in Everett's careful handwriting, along with dates and a single word beside each one that Jake understood with a cold, specific horror to mean taken. Everett Harper had spent his entire adult life as an unofficial, unacknowledged, and completely unrewarded guardian for a town that did not fully understand what he was protecting them from, keeping something ancient and starving fed just enough, managed just carefully enough, that it never took more than it had always taken, never escalated, never came for the town all at once instead of one careful selection at a time. And now Everett Harper was dead. And the entity, whatever it was, had gone quiet for 4 months, which, according to the final entry in the final journal, did not mean it had stopped. It meant it was getting hungry, and it was being patient about how it showed it. Jake did not sleep the 3rd night after finding the journals. He sat in his grandfather's armchair with all 7 notebooks stacked on the side table and tried to understand what he was supposed to do with what he now knew. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, he heard the first sound from the basement. It was not loud. It was, in fact, almost too quiet to be certain he had heard anything at all. A soft, dragging scrape, the kind of sound a heavy object makes when moved slowly across a concrete floor. Coming from directly beneath the rooms where he sat, Jake sat very still and listened. The sound came again. Closer to the basement stairs this time. He did not go down to look. Something in his grandfather's careful handwriting, in 50 years of documented caution, had already taught him more about the wisdom of not investigating strange sounds in this particular house than any instinct of his own could have provided. But he did, eventually, force himself to check the basement door and found that it was locked from the outside with a heavy sliding bolt, the same heavy-duty hardware as the drawer where he had found the journals, clearly installed by his grandfather at some point specifically for this purpose. The bolt was still fastened. Whatever was making the sound was on the other side of a locked door that had never been opened, as far as Jake could tell, in longer than he had been in the house. He went back upstairs. He did not sleep, and in the gray light before dawn, he called the number listed on the business card the estate lawyer had given him, and when the lawyer picked up, groggy and confused at being woken so early, Jake asked him a single question that had been building in him since he read the final journal entry. He asked, "Did anyone else know what my grandfather was doing here? Is there someone else in this town who understands what he was managing?" The lawyer was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You should talk to Dale Whitfield. He runs the hardware store. He and your grandfather were close. If anyone in this town is going to talk to you honestly about Everett, it's him." This is where the story turns, and this is the part you need to pay close attention to, because everything Jake believed about his situation was about to become considerably more complicated and considerably worse. Dale Whitfield was in his 60s, a broad, quiet man with the specific weathered calm of someone who has lived his entire life in one difficult place and made a kind of peace with that difficulty that outsiders mistake for simple resignation. He closed the hardware store early the day Jake came to see him, locked the front door, and sat Jake down in the back office with 2 cups of coffee neither of them drank. He said, "You found the journals?" Jake said he had. Dale said, "Then you understand roughly what your grandfather was doing for this town, even if you don't understand all of it yet." Jake said, "I understand he was trying to protect people. I understand something. Took someone roughly every 18 months, and he was trying to manage who that was, somehow, to keep it from being worse." Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's most of it. But there's a piece your grandfather never wrote down, because writing it down would have meant admitting something he never fully let himself admit, even to me, even at the end." Jake asked what that was. Dale said, "Your grandfather wasn't just identifying people it might take. Near the end, the last few years, he started offering himself in their place. Going up to the old sealed mine entrance at night, on the schedule he'd learned to recognize, standing there, making himself the obvious choice, instead of whoever he was trying to protect. It worked, mostly. It's why the intervals between takings got longer near the end of his life instead of shorter, the way they should have, if the thing was just getting more active with age. He was buying this town time with his own presence, over and over, for years. Jake felt something cold settle into his chest. He said, "Why didn't it take him then, if he was offering himself every time?" Dale looked at him for a long moment, and what was in his face was something between grief and dread that made Jake's stomach drop before Dale said a single word. Dale said, "Because it doesn't want the offered thing, son. It never has. It wants what it decides it wants, on its own schedule, And it takes a particular kind of pleasure, I've come to believe, in refusing what's offered to it and taking something else instead, just to prove it cannot be managed. Not really. Not by anyone. Not even by a man who spent 50 years trying. He paused, he said. Your grandfather went up to that mine entrance every few months for the last decade of his life, offering himself, and every single time, it let him walk back down that mountain untouched, and took someone else instead, or took no one at all for a while, just to make him keep wondering if his sacrifice had worked this time, or if it was simply choosing to wait. Jake said. Then what actually kept people safe, Dale said very quietly. I don't think anything did, son. I think your grandfather spent 50 years believing he was managing something that was never actually being managed. I think it let him believe that, because a town full of people trying to be careful and quiet and unremarkable is a much easier thing to feed from, slowly, over decades, than a town that panics and scatters and draws outside attention. Your grandfather wasn't protecting this town. He looked directly at Jake then. He said, he was helping keep it calm enough to keep harvesting. Jake left the hardware store and drove back to his grandfather's house in a state he could not fully name. Something past fear, something closer to the specific vertigo of understanding that a story he thought he was catching up on the ending of was actually a story with no ending at all, a wheel that had been turning for over 60 years and would keep turning long after he left. Long after everyone currently living in Black Hollow was gone. Because whatever was in that mountain did not experience time the way people did not need the town to survive or thrive, only needed it to continue existing in just enough numbers, replenishing itself slowly enough that outside attention never arrived, forever. That night, back in the house, the sounds from the basement returned. Louder this time, not just dragging now, but something that might have been breathing, slow and enormous, audible even through the locked door and the floor above it. And at some point past midnight, Jake heard something new, scratching, from inside the walls. Not from the basement this time, but from the walls of the room where he sat, moving slowly along the inside of the plaster, tracking, it seemed, the direction he moved when he shifted in his chair, as though something inside the wall itself was following his exact position with careful, patient attention. Jake sat completely still, and the scratching stopped exactly where he had stopped. He understood, with the specific total clarity that arrives only in moments of absolute terror, that his grandfather's death had not simply left a vacancy in the town's careful decades-long arrangement. It had left an opening. A new person, freshly arrived, with a name the entity had likely never had reason to learn before. Someone with no decades of careful pattern to track, no established rhythm of visible caution the way every long-term resident of Black Hollow had slowly, unconsciously developed. Someone new, someone the mountain had not yet decided what to do with. Jake understood, sitting in his grandfather's chair while something moved inside the walls tracking his exact position, that he had exactly one advantage his grandfather never had. He could still leave. He packed a single bag. He did not bother with the rest of the house, the journals, the furniture, any of it. He left the basement bolt exactly as it was. He got in his car at 2 in the morning and drove down the mountain road in the dark, with his headlights the only light for miles, the way he had arrived a week before, except now understanding fully what surrounded that narrow road on both sides. And he did not stop until he crossed the county line, and he did not look in his rearview mirror. Not once. The entire drive, Jake made it back to Seattle. He sold the house in Black Hollow through a broker, sight unseen, for far less than it was worth, to a buyer he never met and never wanted to meet. He has not been back. He does not know what happened to the town after he left. He has not called Dale Whitfield. He tells himself this is because there is nothing he could do that his grandfather did not already spend 50 years failing to do. And this is true. But it is also, he knows, a kind of cowardice he has decided he can live with, because the alternative was staying, and staying was not survivable in any way he was willing to accept. He still thinks about the pattern in his grandfather's journals, roughly every 18 months. A name, a date, a single word. He has started, without quite admitting to himself why, counting months on a calendar he keeps in a drawer he does not look at, often, tracking a rhythm that has nothing to do with his life in Seattle and everything to do with a mountain 4 states away that he left behind, but that he now understands with the same total clarity that came to him. The night the scratching in the walls tracked his exact position, has never actually forgotten his name, because that is the piece of Dale Whitfield's explanation that Jake has never been able to fully escape, no matter how many miles he puts between himself and Black Hollow. It does not need you to stay in the mountain's shadow to remain patient about you. It only needs to have learned your name once. And somewhere in Black Hollow, West Virginia, in a mine sealed with concrete over 60 years ago, and in tunnels beneath it that no map has ever fully charted, something ancient and hungry that spent 50 years letting an old man believe he was managing it, has now noticed that the old man is gone, and has noticed, with whatever patience means, to something that has never once needed to hurry, that a new name arrived in that town for exactly 1 week before it left. A name it has not forgotten. A name it has, according to every pattern in 50 years of careful documentation, simply begun waiting for the right moment to collect.